So marketing teams have a lot of information at their fingertips. It's not always easy to package up, but I think it's really important for marketing teams to help prove their value by really packaging up what they do learn about here's how customers are reacting to our campaigns. These are the keywords that they're clicking on. These are the keywords that they're not interacting with. These are the subject lines and email programs that are working. These are the ones that are not working. This is the kind of content that's working, that's not working, in terms of form factors or topics. And so packaging this up and sharing it back with teammates within the function, but then also across the different departments is hugely important.
This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI-driven performance agency that makes you smarter. Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO. I am your host, Chris Mechanic, here with a really exciting guest. Today's guest is someone who brings a wealth of cross-industry experience. I mean, think about places he's worked and had senior level roles at places as diverse as eBay, the online auction platform, NBA, the National Basketball Association, Epsilon, as well as serving as an industry analyst at Forrester back in his earlier career, where he was providing expert insights into the space of digital marketing and analytics. So this is like an incredibly well-rounded and incredibly experienced person. He was vice president of growth marketing at ADP, where he managed the product, the marketplace, the ventures marketing team, playing a really pivotal role in driving ADP's marketing innovation. Most recently, he was CMO at iCIMS, which is a really interesting talent management and recruitment platform. So very excited to be speaking with him. I feel blessed to have him on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Ari Osur. Welcome, Ari.
Good, man. How you doing?
What is going on, my friend?
Good.
Doing pretty well, man. Doing pretty well. Excited to be speaking with you. And you know how we roll. We like to just lead with the value and just get right to it. You have been like in so many different roles and in so many different spaces that like I think of the brain like a database and like, there's different synapses and like it's just interesting because from my perspective, like for instance, I have a lot of experience in B2B SaaS, and I have a lot of experience in like direct to consumer, especially in financial services, home services, EDU, things like that. But for somebody like you who's just been in so many different spaces, I'm really interested to pick your brain for today. So let's jump right in, man. I mean, you are clearly a badass. What would you say is one of your biggest secrets to marketing success?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris, and happy to spend time with you today also. Especially as we're kind of going into the holiday season and everything too. And I think people are starting to ramp down, but it's fun to have these conversations about marketing in general. Um, I have had a bit of an eclectic background, a lot of focus though on tech, especially on the B2B side of things. And there's just a lot of consistent principles that I've picked up along the way in terms of what works, and especially in cases of really understanding what doesn't work as well, to avoid them, also to really learn from that too. And I think there's a lot of really tried and true practices that successful marketing teams and marketing leaders can follow, and it's things I really try to pull through on my teams as well. Some of them cliche, like getting really close to the customer. It's kind of obvious, but there's ways to really ritualize it and pull it through. And then there's a lot of other ones too that I've kind of built up a long time that I really think are kind of bulletproof. And, as long as marketers can really pull these through into their day-to-day activities and their long-term planning, I think no matter what category you're marketing to, especially on the B2B side, there's ways that you can really help drive a business forward.
I see. So so you basically like let's say you're entering a new company, you bring a set of principles with you to that company.
Right.
And so like where a lot of CMOs are coming in, they're doing their listening tours, they're figuring out like the objectives, the agenda, like what are we going to do this month, this quarter, this year. You're doing those things, but you're also sitting down day one with like, guys, here's the principles that are going to guide our action and directives.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because they're evergreen. They're really things that I've kind of pulled from points of success over time and then built on top of them and thrown them out, modified others as well. And the key is that they're not in conflict with overarching business values. Every company has their core values, their mission statement, the things that they print up, put on posters on the wall. And the principles that I tend to look at from a marketing perspective are specific to the function and can really kind of fall under the core umbrella of core business principles as well.
Yeah. So when you walk in, suppose you have your like go to, 5 or 7 or 10 principles or however much it is. Are you looking at the core values of the company also and kind of like modifying your principles slightly or like attaching them, like saying, okay, principles 1, 3, and 5, like really apply to core value, like 1 and 3. Like, are you doing any of that or are you just basically doing it outside of any context of the core values?
Yeah, so we could definitely get into them in a little bit in detail, but I'll take a look at the company level core values because I want to make sure that they're not repetitive, that it's not redundant. And if there's some that are in the company core values, I'll use those as, obviously maintain the company ones and then pull out the ones from mine and kind of leave them on the cutting room floor, in terms of how I help the team operate as a marketing function itself. So don't want to overcomplicate it, kind of keep it as tight as possible. It's actually a good scenario if there is if there's a pre-existing company core value that mirrors one of mine, because then it just makes my list a little bit shorter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's good. Okay, cool. Well, I still think it's powerful, with your list. Like if one of yours mirrors exactly, like if it stay close to the customer and then, customer obsession is like one of the company's core values, I think it's still smart and powerful to repeat it again because there's kind of like the running joke and the running cynicism around core values that like most people don't know them or don't care about them. They don't really do much more than just sit on the wall in some companies. That's not always the case. Um, cool. Well, tell me, I mean, what are some of these principles I have to hear? Some of your just go-tos.
Absolutely. So, it do have a numbered list. It's six. I can fly through them fairly quickly, and then we can kind of double click down on them. Very, yeah, yeah, absolutely. The first one is know how your business works and be a true partner to your business. And again, these are all related to marketers and the marketing function itself. And when I think of each of these two, I also like to have the inverse on it. So, like, this is what you should do, and this is what you should don't. So, this first one is know how your business works, be a really true partner to the business. The inverse of it is don't be a self serving, siloed marketing department where you're focused on vanity projects that you fall in love with because they sound cool or you think they're going to add value to the marketing team. Everything has to add value to the business and you like be in the business. And I try to think of that too, as it's usually a three-legged stool in terms of being in the business. So you need to have really tight alignment with the customer. We just spoke about that cliche thing, but it's really about knowing who is your business's customer, what makes them tick.
I mean, it's important.
Absolutely. So things like advisory councils, things like that, getting as close as possible, market research, all of that amazing stuff. That's kind of like, mom and apple pie, marketing 101 stuff, of course. Then there's alignment with the product team, the capabilities that your company offers, and understanding the product market fit with the customers. That's the second one. And then the third is alignment with sales, and the full go-to-market function. And so without those three legs of the stool, that's gonna collapse. Your marketing stool is gonna collapse. There's no way that you can sit on it. And then, and double
And
clicking
then this,
down. Yeah, yeah, Chris.
we're still on principle number one.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, that could maybe be the principle, because if you do all those things, like it's going to be hard not to be effective. But keep going. So you were saying to double click.
Yeah, definitely. And I think bringing those partners into your planning process, making them feel like true stakeholders from a marketing perspective too, is going to help with buying. It's also going to help your team be better marketers because they're going to be more informed. They're going to be more in line with what the business is doing and all about. I think we've probably all been in situations where marketers and their teams have been focused on just marketing specific goals, checking the right boxes, saying, "Hey, we brought in these MQLs, or we brought in a certain number of leads here," and kind of throw them over the fence and say, like, "Hey, our job is done." When in fact, those don't follow through and become real live wins and the right kind of revenue that's going to help for the long term, then you're not really doing your job and you're not really checking the boxes in the right ways. So, I think it's all about, knowing the business, but really, really being a partner with the business. And that's the first one. And it's the one that,
That's cool. So that's awesome. So your principles are not just like, your principles are not just a one liner. Your principles are kind of a one liner in a very short manual. I love that you have the don't section, like the don't do this. That's a great way, I think, to call out the essence of what you should be doing. Um, but okay, so that's brilliant.
yeah. And on the don'ts, I'd originally, come up with a list. And a lot of them were don'ts. And then you realize it's kind of a bummer, it's a little negative. So, it's always good to kind of flip it to the positive, and then kind of contrast it there. Yeah, and the
So
second one. Yeah, go ahead.
before we started recording, we were joking about the Ray Dalio book, like Principles Ray Dalio. Have you actually read that book, or are you familiar with that book? Have you read it?
I'm familiar with it. I've read excerpts. I've actually not sat down and read it kind of cover to cover. I think I've read other people's takes who have done the reading for me.
Yeah, I've not either actually, but it just sounded like this is probably how his book does go. But no, I like it. This is this is more than I thought it was, or that I thought it would be, in a good way. So let's keep going. What's number 2?
I'm waiting for the movie to come out for the Ray Dalio principles. I'll that. Yeah. So the second one is, if you have to fly blind, then stay out of the air. And the inverse of that is, don't do anything you can't track and measure. Your CEO, your board, they all want to know numbers. It is really hard these days to justify marketing budget, let alone get more marketing budget. And if you can't prove the value, it's just not going to work. You're not going to get the budget that you think you need, and the numbers will play it out. And so, making sure you've got the right tracking, the right attribution in place, understand the impact, the value of everything along the way will help you do that. So if you've got programs in place with really soft, fuzzy metrics or no metric behind them at all, and there's dollars behind that, it can be really tough to justify that at the end of the day. There's always going to be programs that don't have a direct return on them, but I think you need to kind of get creative and think about, okay, is this something that might impact our awareness or perception or consideration over time? And then what are secondary metrics that we can use to maybe measure those? Is it a brand equity tracker that you're doing? Is it, RFP volume? Is it other metrics like that that you might be impacting if things, if it's not based on clicks, things like that?
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense too. I like that. And it's, I think, what I heard wasn't necessarily like, hey, if it's not, well, it was definitely like, don't launch campaigns without tracking in place, right? Like, I definitely heard that, right? But there's like, I've heard several CMOs say things to the tune of like, sometimes follow your gut feel, like sometimes do the untrackable, especially as it relates to brand, right? Because that's hard to track. But what I heard that was interesting from you is you're like, come up with the way to track it. Like there's probably some metric. Like I've argued with some that that brand awareness spend can actually be tracked somewhat of a workaround way through brand search volume, right? So how many people are searching for level agency or web mechanics in a given month? And if we're going to spend $100,000 on like a brand awareness campaign, then we should reasonably expect that number to go up and that's a measurable thing. So I think find a metric or invent a metric when something's not totally trackable is kind of a good offshoot of that too.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point because there is kind of this yin and yang in the market right now between demand gen spend and real performance based spend versus brand spend. And I think especially against the backdrop of constrained resources and a real focus on numbers and funnel metrics, a lot of marketers are feeling pressure to cut back on brand spend and focus really more on really easily attributable DG spend and efforts. But then in the long term, they tend to see things like web traffic decline, organic web traffic decline, overall search volume, to your earlier point, go down, things like RFP volume go down. And so you kind of get that long-term erosion of really important metrics when you stop investing on the brand side. And I think probably later we're going to get into this in terms of things that are kind of keeping us up at night. But what's tough there is that the cost on the brand side is also escalating a lot too. So, it's sometimes easier said than done. So, there's definitely a lot of hard thinking, planning, analysis that has to go into this stuff in terms of the overall media mix.
Hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours, even if you're already a client. If you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.
Cool. Well, what else you got? I like both of these that you got so far.
Yeah. So the third one is celebrating failure. And, the flip side of that is don't sugarcoat performance and avoid taking healthy risks. And it's not necessarily about hiding failures as much as it is that when you don't confront failures as a team, you become much more risk averse. And as marketers, you have to try new things. You have to be innovative because the backdrop and the buying experience is constantly changing. Things are so different than what it was even just a few years ago. And so if you're really risk averse, if you're afraid to fail, if you're kind of shoving your failures, underneath the rug, then you're just going to be a lot less innovative at the end of the day. So, I always like telling my team, let's share our failures with each other. I was bring them up at meetings, had town hall meetings, team meetings where we have the failure of the month and spotlight that and talk about it, but do it more from a learning perspective. And then you get people who are not as scared to bring up things that didn't go right, especially when they can talk about, well, based on this, this is what we're going to be doing moving forward from the learnings on it.
And that's good. That's really good. I like that one a lot. And it's so easy to sugarcoat failures because and it's I've noticed this happening to me all the time as a business owner. Like nobody really wants to be the bearer of bad news, right? And so there's a lot of times where it's like, hey, how did that call go? Or how did that meeting go? Or how did that campaign go? And like the classic answer is like, oh, it went pretty well. Right. But like, okay, well, tell me, like, don't make me dig and dig and dig to find, like the moles and the warts. Like, just tell me kind of sort of when I ask like, hey, how'd it go? I'm almost asking like, hey, tell me the bad news. And then tell me the
Absolutely, because if you look at typical win rates, especially on the B2B side, last couple of years for most companies, they're not that high. And so if everyone's coming back from a meeting or an engagement and saying, yeah, it went really well, could have gone that well if, you're not winning every, new business opportunity at 90% clip. Are you? Doubt it. So totally agree with you.
cool. All right. And number four?
Yeah, number 4, and this one I totally stole, from a really, great leader that I worked for at the National Basketball Association, Scott O'Neil, who ran our group over there, has gone on to do really really great things, and he had his own principles, and this one I'm just, unabashedly lifting and shifting from Scott, but it's don't be a squirrel, and I'm also breaking my negative rule on this one because it is, a nice additional one, but don't be a squirrel, and it's all, squirrels are out there, especially, for the winter, they're gathering their nuts, they're storing their nuts, they're keeping them for themselves, they're not sharing they're nuts. And by that, I mean, don't stockpile your treasures and your information and keep it for yourself. Share what you learn and what you know with your teammates, and really most importantly, with the broader company. So marketing teams have a lot of information at their fingertips. It's not always easy to package up, but I think it's really important for marketing teams to help prove their value by really packaging up what they do learn about, here's how customers are reacting to our campaigns. These are the keywords that they're clicking on. These are the keywords that they're not interacting with. These are the subject lines and email programs that are working. These are the ones that are not working. This is the kind of content that's working, that's not working, in terms of form factors or topics. And so packaging this up and sharing it back with teammates within the function, but then also across the different departments is hugely important. And if you keep this information to yourself, um, it might help you, but it's not going to help the business. And it's really goes back to, it's a principle number one too, about being a good partner. So I think sharing, oversharing, but doing it in a way that you're packaging up insights and value, is really so important. And marketing's got an amazing perch and sits on so much incredible information about customers, personas, what's going on in the outside world, that it's really incumbent on us to be another signal and give that back to product teams, the sales teams, the customer success teams, to the executive teams as well.
Yeah, one quick question on that. In your experience, because you mentioned something which I totally agree with, is that massive amount of information, massively valuable information, but not easy to package it, right? Like if it feels like there should be an AI that
that does that or packages it or does the first draft. I don't know of one as of now that can like pull data from disparate systems and, and package it all up. How do you generally execute that? Is it like, hey, everybody, you know, package up some good findings once a week? Is it like, hey, once a month we're doing this like, broader and more robust packaging exercise, and like, hey, it's the intern or the junior level person that's going to pull all this data? Because it is incredibly valuable, I agree, but it's also quite laborious. And I think for most marketers, for CMOs listening, they're like, "Oh, yes, definitely, like, we wanna package that info." But for most marketers, they're like, I would rather be, like, making great ads and engaging with, clients and customers and, like, doing campaigns." Like, it's like, a really, laborious thing that most marketers don't necessarily enjoy doing. How do you actually, like, actualize that or make it tactical?
Yeah, and I think there's a balance, and I think you're raising a really good point too. There's also I think you need to get an understanding of what are the audiences in your organization that you want to share information with. How do they consume information? What's the right frequency? And what's really the reason behind it, right? And so I think if you're talking about your internal marketing team, the frequency is probably going to be a little bit higher. You can get into a little bit more detail and kind of have it a little more channel specific so that people can optimize what they're doing. I think the marketing team might have a little bit more of an appetite for that on an ongoing basis. And then in situations like that, doesn't need to be deep, polished reports. It could be like, okay, we just ran a program or a campaign. Here are the results, and then here's an analysis from an insights perspective. What worked, what didn't work. Might be two bullet points. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work, and then here's key takeaways for next time. So becomes part of your business as usual operating way of operating, then it can be easier. When you're talking about other teams, though, based on my experience, they absolutely have an appetite for it, but it's not going to be on a weekly basis. People just don't have the bandwidth to read research or insights all the time. So I think it's a matter of packaging up. Might be on a monthly basis. It could be bi-monthly or quarterly. And it's kind of the big screaming headlines and key takeaways about what the buyers, what prospects, customers out in the market really are seeing and reacting to. So it could be the biggest the biggest trends, big swings in the market, and the things that will really be valuable to them. So I think you need to kind of boil it down, simplify. What I've done in the past is put together insights newsletters and get those out, but really try to make them more like digests and very short, punchy as much as possible. Um, the other tactic that works really well is there could be other leaders of functions, and I've seen this with, really good chief revenue officers or operations leaders who will want to invite marketing representatives to their team meetings. Say like, hey, can you be a guest speaker or can you meet with my leaders and kind of boil down what you guys are seeing out there? So that could be a little bit more of a deep dive opportunity. Um, Also development opportunity too. I really love giving channel managers, even more junior people, the opportunity to put those presentations together, give them a chance to present, work on their executive presentation skills in those internal meetings too. So it's a way of giving people on your team opportunities to kind of get the spotlight who maybe don't get it that often. So you can really make a really good positive.
That's true. I remember, early on in my career, when I would get asked to do something like that, I would consider it to be a real honor and a real opportunity, and it was, like, fun, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely use it as a way to get people engaged, from on a personal level. so that they can communicate the value of what they do to new audiences. And always those other departments are really appreciative, to get that information too. But yeah, like I said, though, it all goes back to just like the spirit of sharing and making sure that, first you have to understand what are the insights and the important things, and then make sure that you're sharing them with the right people in your company.
So that maybe that can be the direct principle, like spirit of sharing, and then the anti is don't be a squirrel.
Right. Yeah. It could be, yeah, rework that
But
one.
yeah, because that's a good way to frame it. And I think communication is something where, you know how everybody has a gauge, right? Like there's a gauge of how outgoing you are versus how introverted you are. There's a gauge of how optimistic you naturally are versus how pessimistic, right? I think everybody has a communication gauge, like just how naturally communicative that they are. And so, some people will very naturally be over communicators, but other people, and I'm one of them, like I'm not really, I don't think a great communicator, much to my own dismay. I wish I was a better communicator, but it just doesn't occur to me that like, hey, I ought to share this with others. Um, so anyway, I think spirit of sharing is a good way to make under communicators like me probably want to share more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, once people kind of get a taste for that, and, it can help them. Maybe they thought that they weren't great communicators or they were scared of it, but once they kind of try it and do it, like, oh, I can do this, or, help them kind of confront, those fears from a personal development perspective.
Yeah. And for me, it's not even a fear. It's just like, it just doesn't occur to me. Like, it just doesn't dawn on me. Like I might share it with like the one or two people that it affects most greatly, but it doesn't occur to me that like customer success might want to hear about something that we did in marketing or, um, so anyway, I like it. This is great, man. This is awesome. I'm conscious of time. I want to get to the other segment, but do you have one or two others that you feel like are really fire that you want to share?
Two more we can knock about pretty quickly. One is go outside in, and this is, the inverse of that is don't fall in love with yourself. And this is the one that, up front, we kind of spoke about this one. Um, it's become a little bit cliche in terms of bringing in an outside perspective, but if you don't do it, you're screwed. Like you will not be a successful marketer, and your function will fail. So you do have to put your customers and prospects at the center of everything. And it's about, doing the right research and talking to them, building personas and then pulling those personas into the briefs that your team puts together when you're developing programs and campaigns and creating assets, and then testing the positioning and the messaging and the differentiation that you come up with. Um, Testing all that stuff with your customers before you go and market with it. Because at the end of the day, if you don't go outside in, you're going to be, thinking with too much navel gazing, you're going to get it wrong. Earlier in my career, I did a lot of email marketing, and I would think I was writing the best subject lines for a certain campaign, and we always did ABC testing on subject lines, and very rarely was the one that I thought that was going to win actually won. But it didn't matter because the people that, do the voting on it are the recipients, are the customers, and they're the ones that have the final say. They know what works, and what doesn't. It's not always the marketer. I think the only exception to this was Steve Jobs, who kind of said, screw the customer. We're going to do what I think is right. But who among us is Steve Jobs? None of us are, right? He was kind of, they broke the mold when it came to him. So
There's a very quick product plug that I want to drop. And it's not something that we're getting paid for. It's just, somebody, it was a former guest on the show, but I think he's doing great work and, he's got a great product.
but are you familiar with Winter, Winter?
Yes.
It's yeah, it's by Pep La and the CXL team, but that I think is a really cool platform to get some really good feedback from like an outside in perspective. And it's, it's essentially like a user survey type of a thing. And you could go to usertesting.com or something. And this is something where, like, suppose you're going to redesign the homepage, right? Like, you could show these users two different versions, and you can have them try to interact with it, or you can ask them detailed questions about it. The distinction that I really like about Winter is that while it's a little bit more expensive, you can actually get like CMOs to be your audience. If you go on usertesting.com, like the closest you can get are marketing professionals, and that might be an intern or, a PPC manager or something. But on Winter, you can go and actually specify, like, I want these job titles specifically. And yeah, you have to pay a little bit more. And the surveys are incentivized. Like the people taking the surveys are getting paid whatever, $50 or $100 to do it. Um, but you don't need a million of them. And, 10 or 20 responses could really give you like the right perspective over what you're putting out.
Yeah. Yeah. I've used it in the past. And I think what's cool too is that you get some qualitative feedback also. So you can put in some open text questions in the survey, and nearly all of the respondents will fill those in with their thoughts. And so it's that extra color that you get above and beyond just kind of the quantitative, I liked version A instead of B and C. You kind of can get a little bit, you can double click down into it. So yeah, it's actually become easier than ever to have that outside in approach, because there are techniques like Winter and others out there where you can get, kind of rapid fire responses. Whereas in the past, you might have to do really expensive focus groups or pull people together in advisory boards, which I definitely recommend doing. But for kind of tactical things now too, it's become much easier to do outside it.
Totally. Totally. I'm surprised that there's not more companies that are like using their LinkedIn organic presence to be like, which of these ads do you like better? Like, do you like ad A or ad B better? And then basically take that feedback and use that to run your ad. Cause usually like when you run ad, I mean, anytime I've run ads, I've always been like, I've had a I'm like, "Oh, we ought to test that." And then I'm like, "Oh, we should test this angle." And I'm like, "Oh, we should test this also." And before I know it, there's like too many angles, like, and not enough budget. You can't really test them each, sufficiently. So I'm surprised we don't see more, B2Bs like using their LinkedIn organic presence.
I've got one cat, or I've got the sixth and final one, and then we can move on to the other challenge. But the last one we do kind of quick is always play offense. And so the inverse of it is don't get caught flat-footed and stay hungry. So the competition is always hungry, and complacency kills businesses that have been successful or who believe they've been successful. So, there's lots of there could be reinforcement in analyst feedback or elsewhere, like, "Hey, you guys are top category. You're doing great." But there's always people coming after you, and especially if you're in an attractive category, there's always going to be new entrants that might be larger and better resourced than you, or smaller and hungrier. And so, always have to play offense. Nothing too late if you're playing defense.
No, that's a really good one too. That's a really good one. I mean, especially for those larger companies or the ones that have had more success. I think pretty much universally all small companies, like all startups, are naturally very hungry. I think you need to have some level of hunger in your belly even to join one of those startups, right? So it is, and and I experienced this personally, through my own journey when we were small and young and dumb, like we were going after everybody left and right, right? Like we were like a bull in a china shop and just going for it. But then as we grew, naturally there's a tendency, I think, to get a little bit more conservative, right? Like you don't necessarily have the chutzpah to say the types of things in your ads that you might have said in the early days. Or maybe your earlier ads might have offended somebody and you've gotten some feedback from it, whatever the reason. Or like maybe you're just like the leader in the space and you know, you have a big inbound flow and you've got the brand presence and the brand awareness. Like I could imagine probably an ADT of the world or an IBM of the world or, an Accenture could easily fall victim to that. So I think I like that one actually a lot. Is just like, hey, how are we playing offense today?
Absolutely. I mean, there's, and it's not easy because you just got certain cash cows in your business and there's such a focused on EBITDA and, maintaining your position and, making sure that you don't have, you don't over index on certain investments too. And so it's not as easy as it sounds to always play offense because there's kind of business metrics that can get in the way at times. But it could be in the tone of what you're doing. It could be in the positioning. It could be making sure that you're doing conquesting programs and going after other competitors in the right way with integrity, of course. So there's ways to play offense as well. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to, certainly try to outspend everyone too.
Yeah, being scrappy with it. You know who continues to impress me, who is anything but small, is Amazon. Did you hear that Amazon is going into the chip business to go head to head with Nvidia? It just happened like a couple days ago. But they're going into the chip business and they're positioning. So Nvidia makes like these really advanced chips that can do awesome stuff like video and, advanced reasoning and stuff. Like they're going to go after the lower end of the market for just like chips that, think about like GPT 3.5, for instance, like the stuff that's like relatively easy. So like, but they're entering that business. And that's always been part of their ethos is just like, take 100 risks per year kind of thing. And maybe one of them will turn into whatever AWS or whatever it is. There's also another stock that I'm following, company that I'm following called Hims and Hers. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it does like, it's like a telehealth platform for like male pattern baldness or like some of these other, conditions and basically like a alternative to the traditional pharmacy that's like much more convenient and more private and cost effective and whatnot. So their stock has been surging like crazy, and it doesn't seem like it's that expensive on a multiples basis. Like it seems like it's got room to run. So I've bought a little bit of it, and I'm thinking about buying more. But the reason that I know that, so Amazon has also decided in the last like 2 weeks, like literally the last 2 weeks, to enter that business. So you're soon going to see an Amazon competitor for that business. It's like, man, you got to admire that, for a company that big to still be taking swings like that and playing offense like that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, they definitely have a strong strategy team over there. They're always looking at what categories are adjacent to what they do now, where they have, maybe the brand permissions to extend into, and then using their scale, their customer contacts, their other capabilities. I mean, that's the original AWS story where they're like, hey, we built up this giant infrastructure so that they can stand all their businesses up on it. Why not allow other businesses to then tap into it? And it's become such a massive, lucrative business for them. So it's not surprising to see them kind of taking that mentality, to other categories that seem really different, but it's kind of the same concept, like giant scale, huge distribution network. You know, pretty much every human being in America and other major markets is a customer now. So there's a lot that they're gonna be able to do with all their platforms.
Yeah, I was just really impressed to see, a company of their size and stature within a period of like 2 or 3 weeks announce that they're getting into 2 new businesses, one of which is like a multi-trillion dollar, behemoth, intensely competitive where they're competing with Nvidia, who has like more or less a legal monopoly on that whole space. And another of which is like this tiny little, maybe $100 billion business where there's like a few small players in it. I don't know. It's just very cool, I think. But I like that principle. That's the takeaway. Dude, we're getting long here. We have just a couple more minutes before we wrap, but I have just a couple more questions for you. And I'll give them both to you at the same time. You can answer them one at a time or weave it all together however you like. But I'm wondering, A, what keeps you up at night as a CMO? And then B, like what are you most bullish on in terms of channels, go-to-market motions? Like I know you've done demand gen, you've done brand, you've done events, right? Like you've done um, content and SEO and search, but what are you bullish on and what's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, we can start with the challenges and what keeps me up at night, and I think about, earlier we spoke about it's not easy to justify budget, improve value in what you do. So you need to track, measure everything. And I think um, the backdrop there is that costs keep on escalating. So like, in all of our day-to-day lives, inflation has hit everyone. It looks like it was one of the biggest factors in the most recent presidential election, and marketers are probably nodding their heads too, because we've been seeing it on our side really since the pandemic, especially when people started coming back to do more face to face and in person things. We've seen the cost of events go up, 30 to 40% in the last few years. Not just the sponsorships of conferences and regional events, but the cost of event services and booths and doing cool things on site. And so when the costs go up by that much, it really means that there's fewer events that you can really do because nobody's budgets are really haven't gone up, in concert with the increasing costs there. So it means that there's probably fewer touch points, fewer options for you to activate there as costs go up. And then I'm sure you see this in your world too, but the cost of media and impressions has certainly gone up a lot too. And this is in at least in my world, mostly in tech and professional services, that there have not been as many live projects or active buyers in the market. It's been a lot more, what we think of as tire kickers, people out there who are like, yeah, maybe they're checking out information, maybe they'll download an asset or they'll click on something and check it out. But when the SDRs or BDRs or AEs reach out to them, doesn't really feel, like a true active project, and it's not as easy to qualify it. So when you're spending more money on media and trying to reach people, through paid media events, these other outlets, it becomes tougher. And, there's more stakeholders involved, especially on the B2B side. The buying process is more complex. And so, what I'm bullish about is that you got to just keep on innovating and trying new things that do work. And I think what I am excited about is that um, there are better data signals out there right now for marketers to take advantage of. So I've seen so much success in things like intent data, and it's not new. Intent data has been around for a while. But if people are in market, if they are shopping the category, this is great information to feed over to your salespeople and to run marketing programs against these folks because you're more likely to get that positive response and that positive outcome.
What intent data sources have you had success with? Like, have you used what, G2 or 6sense, or like where do you like to get your intent data?
Yeah, so most recently those were two of them. G2, Six Sense, also, demand base has a pretty broad intent signal universe as well across a couple thousand publishers. We always like testing new intent signals because sometimes, especially with companies like Six Sense, Demand Base, these aggregators of intent data, it's a little bit of a black box. You're not totally sure what publishers or media properties they're using. And we've looked at tracking intent data over time as an understanding of how the category is doing. It's not that easy to do that because you're not quite sure who's kind of come in and come out of the data set in terms of what they're tracking. So I think it's always good to test and see, but we have seen with like G2 and some of its competitors, that's typically pretty good because those are people who are sort of out there doing comparison shopping at that point. So they're usually a little bit more serious there. The other
Mm,
good data set that we've seen work wonders is with job movers. So people with certain titles, and maybe you've worked with them in the past, but they've then moved to another company and you get a ping from these job mover data providers that, hey, Chris is now over at this new company, and you then market to them, or you have your SDR BDR teams reach out to them. Seeing a really strong ROI on that as well because
interesting. Where do you get that data, or who are the providers?
yeah, so I use a company called User Gems in the past. They've done a really nice job there. The ROI has been really strong.
I know them. Yeah, their CMO was on the pod. They are pretty badass. I like them too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just really good ROI, especially if you provide to them the right people that you want to kind of keep an eye on for when they show up somewhere new. And so that could be people who've had a positive experience with your company in the past, and then they show up at a new company. And, there's always studies out there on the B2B side that people who are new to a role are much more likely to shop around, bring in new vendors, usually vendors that they've worked with in the past. So you want to get to them pretty early when they're starting their planning process because all new people like to put their imprint on a new company when they join.
I've been really inspired by this. I've enjoyed a lot. I've got the principles right here listed out. We'll include them in the show notes. I won't repeat them, but some of my favorites I would say would be the spirit of sharing, I think is a really powerful one. I think the playing offense is a really powerful one. The initial ones like knowing the biz, I agree, are a little bit cliche at this point, but that doesn't mean they're not important. And it doesn't mean it's not easy to lose sight of them. And it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be repeated over and over and over and over again and made part of the, the ethos. So I love it overall, man. It's really cool. I've learned a lot. For everybody that's listening, if you've learned anything or been inspired or even laughed a little bit, pay it forward, share this with a friend, or give us a 5-star like or comment on the pod wherever you get your pods. We always appreciate that. Ari, this has been awesome, man. I really have enjoyed it. For folks that would like to learn more about you and the things that you're doing these days, like where would be the best place for them to go?
LinkedIn's the easiest place.
LinkedIn, 100%. All right. Cool. Well, Ari, stick around for just a minute. We'll do our final wrap offline here. But for everybody else, that was another awesome episode of Revenue Driven CMO, and we will see you next time.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. Even if you're already a client, if you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.